100 Stories is a new video and podcast series that's intended to provide a platform for people of colour to share their experiences of prejudice and journeys to success.
So my name is Ade, and I'm working with Sussex, the Sussex Innovation Centre. And yeah, I was very intrigued to get involved in the 100 Stories podcast. And I thought Kyla would be a great guest for this podcast. So yeah, if you don't mind, could you introduce yourself, your occupation, and what organizations or companies you're working with?
Sure. So my name is Kyla, and I'm currently in my third year of University at Sussex studying international business with French. And it has been a really amazing experience here. So I can't believe I'm about to leave. I'm definitely going to miss it. But along the way, I've had so many incredible opportunities to meet new people and to join different societies and really push myself out of my comfort zone. Along these 4 years, I've become involved in Enactus, which is a social entrepreneurial society. And basically what we do is we look at issues within our community and internationally, and we try to formulate projects around them to help solve the issues. So for example, in Brighton, homelessness is a serious issue that affects our whole community. So we have one project going right now where we're looking at the homeless, we're looking at our beneficiaries, and we're really trying to figure out what they need, how we can make their lives better, and how we can effectively make the community better. So within doing that, it's interesting because there's so many, homelessness is like an umbrella. So the same way mental health is an umbrella, where there's so many different things that kind of add to the process of getting to that stage. It's the same thing with homelessness. So with our projects, they have to be incredibly specific, where we really have to focus in on our beneficiaries' need to help them and to try to prevent things like this happening in the future. In addition to that, I'm also very active within Sussex as a university. So I was an RA, which is a residential advisor for 2 years, which you're basically giving support to new students and existing students if they still need it. A WP ambassador, where you get to take children from different schools around the university, and you really get to introduce them into the possibilities of becoming a university student and introduce them into the courses and things that you're studying and your experiences, and really trying to make sure that they understand the fact that it is possible. No matter where they come from, anything is possible, and they can get to where they need to be with hard work and determination. In addition to that, I'm also a campus ambassador, which is a little bit similar to WP. We just help the campus and make sure everything's running well. I have a radio show with my partner who is also went to Sussex, and it's called Relax&Bake FM, it's probably one of my favorite things that I've ever done at university. It definitely pushed me out of my comfort zone through interviews and hosting music events and things like that. It's been really, really incredible. So I'm involved in quite a couple of things, a couple of apps as well. So I think I've definitely dipped my toe into a couple of places. So being at Sussex has really helped me do that.
Wow, very interesting. More than a couple, must I?
Yeah.
Add. More than a
couple things.
But yeah, no, I really appreciate you speaking with me today for the podcast and this series, because I think your perspective will be very different and very insightful to a lot of people, seeing as obviously you're not from the UK, and you would have a very different outlook to the to race and how that has affected the world, because you're coming from a different country. So yeah, my questions are kind of based on the feedback form that I sent you. So yeah, they're pretty standard. But first of all, I'd like to know, when was your first encounter with racism or racial inequality?
So originally I'm from Bermuda, which is a tiny, tiny little island. I moved over here to England when I was 17 for boarding school. And for me personally, that was probably the perfect age that I could have done it, because I know a lot of parents, and especially at my boarding school, a lot of parents as well, they sent their kids over when they were like 9, 10 years old, coming into either lower school or going into middle school. And I think for me personally, sending your kids off that early isn't really the best idea, because you're missing some really, really crucial parts of their lives and their development. So for me, being sent off at 17 was incredible, because it wasn't only a part of my life where I had to deal with certain things on my own, but I had to grow into myself. But it was also a part of my life where I was also easily molded. So it was the perfect combination of me knowing who I was as a person, and then also developing even further into the person that I am now, and hopefully the person that I'm becoming as well. In saying that, the move over was very, very, very different. There's a lot of cultural differences as well. And when I was at home, I went to a private school called BHS, and it was a predominantly white school. And my kind of first experience, not necessarily of racism, but more of ignorance, was when I had a friend from Germany, and there's quite a couple expats in Bermuda. So I had this friend from Germany, and my school was really diverse with a lot of expats, and then a lot of white Bermudians and not so many Black Bermudians. So me and her became really, really good friends. And I remember we went on a play date, and on the way home, she had said to her dad, she was like, "Oh, and the Negroes, blah, 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 blah." And I had to be, I don't know, maybe about 10. I'd probably give myself 10, I'd say, or 12. So somewhere around that young age. And I think when it's your first experience, you really, really don't know how to take it. So especially because of the fact that she was foreign as well. I know that she didn't mean any harm, which is why I say not necessarily my first experience of racism, but more of ignorance. I didn't know how to take it. So she said this thing, and then I went upstairs when they dropped me off, and I could also feel kind of like the awkwardness in the car, because her dad tried to move away from what she just said a little bit. So obviously he knew that that made me feel awkward, and he knew that that was probably not the right thing to come out of her mouth. But I went up to my mom and my grandma, and I was like, I was just with my friend, and she said Negro, and I don't know how to take that. I don't know if I should be offended, because obviously it's not the other N word, so it's not as offensive, although it still is, but it's not as offensive. So do I take it in a negative way, or do I just kind of be a little bit calm about it? I was very conflicted in my emotions. And my grandma said to me, she sat me down and she said, listen, there's going to be situations where you're around people who are not understanding, or don't take the time to understand where you come from. And you're going to be in uncomfortable situations because you are Black and that's your color, that's who you are. But there's ways that you can move around it. And the fact that you've had this experience now is good, because you're going to be stronger in the future, and you're going to know how to deal with it in the future. So from a very young age, my mom and my grandma had a conversation with us, and she broke down where the word comes from, and she broke down the other word as well in terms of where it comes from and what its actual meaning is. And she said that word is not for us. It's a word that just means dirty, and white people associated it with us, and that's where it's come from. But the word can be used for anyone. It's just that it's more associated with us. So having that broken down was really, really important to me. And I think that in my first experience was very eye-opening, because obviously there was many experiences to come after that, especially in my school where, as I said, it was predominantly white, and the education system was definitely more tailored to American history, not even like literally not even Bermudian history, but American history and history that had nothing to do with us. So that was probably my first experience that I could remember.
Wow. That's really interesting that you had your grandmother there to kind of explain that to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very important to have that that person, you know, from an older generation to kind of explain these things to you, especially from a young age, because because I know I've experienced some similar things, and you don't really know how to handle it until you're educated about why some people might feel a certain way towards you or might say certain things towards you. Um, and yeah, having that education from someone that loves you and that's probably been through it for a longer time is very important. But yeah, props to your
Yeah,
grandmother.
absolutely. And I think
Education.
that story as well, I was in other situations where I hadn't gone and told my mom or my grandmother afterwards, and I wish that I did, because when your children, when you know that your children are going to have to go through that, it's very important to sit down and have that conversation from early, because there's certain things that you're not going to learn in school, and financial literacy is one of them, actually. I'm not sure why we don't teach that earlier, but I think that there's certain things that your children just aren't going to learn in school. It's life lessons, and depending on where you come from, those life lessons may have a bit more gravitas than other lessons. So I think it's a lesson in itself to sit your children down, explain to them the issues that they're probably going to face in the future, and just try to break it down, so whether they come into a situation like that or not, they're prepared for it and know how to deal with it better. Because I think that's the other issue with Black children, is when we're faced with a situation like that, it's extremely uncomfortable. And especially if we haven't gotten that kind of teaching beforehand, we have no idea how to deal with it. So I didn't know how to say or reply to that. I just felt like I was overthinking it as well. So sitting your kids down and just having that conversation with them beforehand is incredibly important.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm picking up on something that you mentioned earlier, where you mentioned, I think you used the word ignorance instead of racist. And that was kind of interesting to me because there is actually a difference between the two. And obviously it's education for ignorance, and then for racism is something that I don't think anybody can understand. But how would you say your experience has been dealing with these two and distinguishing between those two as it compares from Bermuda to the UK?
I think distinguishing between the two is incredibly important, because when you're able to tell between the two, you're able to decide on how you should respond. And as you said, there's a huge difference between ignorance and racism. Ignorance comes from a place of not understanding, and I think racism is more not understanding and then not even bothering to understand. So it goes much deeper, and then I think it goes deeper into your personality, the way that you've been raised, and further things like that. So it's very different. And for me, I think that was a form of ignorance that I had experienced. And when I came to England, there was more ignorance. So like I said, I went to a private school, which was predominantly white in Bermuda. And then I came to boarding school, which was, again, predominantly white. So for me, the borders and the day girls were very different. There was a bit of a divide between them, because obviously you don't get that chance to, chill with them after school. You can't really go out on the weekends as easily. So there was a difference there. And my friends were all Nigerian. So the school was pretty diverse. It was definitely a mix of people, but my friends were Nigerian. So we had this one friend who was from England, and she was such a sweetheart, and she had been friends with a couple of my friends for like years and years, and then I came in the last 2 years. So over those last 2 years, she really kind of indulged in the culture, and she took opportunities to learn about the music and learn about the dancing and the food, and that was genuine interest where she, like, from her heart, she appreciated it and she wanted to learn more about it, and she was actually interested in it. So over the last 2 years, she became a lot more, not necessarily a lot more like us, but obviously just kind of gravitated more towards us, towards our culture, and wanting to be a part of it. So at the end of the year, we went to someone's house and we had a big end of year party, and it was really, really lovely. And we were all sitting together, and one of the girls said to her, she goes, "So when did you start hanging out with those people?" And that's ignorance, because it's like, what do you mean those people? And she didn't know what she said. And myself and my friend look at each other, and obviously she understands because, you know, she's hung around us, and she kind of her mind is very more is much more open to experiences like that. So she understood from the jump. When we looked at each other, we were like, what does she mean those people? And it's very difficult when you're in a situation like that, because again, you don't know how to respond if you haven't either had enough practice, or if you are kind of just nervous and you don't want to ruin the moment a little bit. So I think the ignorance that I've experienced in both countries is quite similar in the fact that it's completely unintentional, but I think it stems from a long line of parents not actually teaching their children. Because if her parents were probably more open and more exposed her to more culture and more diversity and just different backgrounds in general, she would know what it means to say those people and to single out a whole section of humans. So I think ignorance comes from the same place. Racism comes from, I don't want to say a place of hate, but it definitely is much, much more deeper than ignorance. Because with ignorance, you can identify what you've said, you can identify what is wrong, and then you can choose to do something about it, and you can choose to learn. With racism, it's so ingrained. It's like, you know, it's like talking to a brick wall.
Yeah, I totally agree. What would be your way of handling it now, given that you've gone through these experiences? The reason why I'm asking this question is because I'm sure there'll be a lot of people listening that may encounter, unfortunately, a similar experience, or that have encountered a similar experience, and they haven't gone through the proper way to handle it. And obviously it is kind of difficult to respond to such comments, or respond to such actions. But how would you go about handling it?
I think now I've definitely had time to think about it, as well as talk to other people about it. So for the radio show Relax&Bake FM, we hosted a Black Lives Matter talk around everything that's happened in the past couple of months, and then of course on the general scheme of things of racism, inequality, police brutality, systematic racism, all of those things in general that are pre-existing. So I had an amazing conversation with 3 incredible women, one who had just graduated and her family extremely connected in politics and in Black politics in particular, welcoming Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, just incredible people like that. Another wonderful woman called Adrian, who is owner of the Literacy Peak Project, where they specifically have a book club for minority authors. And then a wonderful, wonderful girl from the University of Manchester's feminist collective, who leads the society, and she was incredible. So I had 2 Black women on and 1 white woman, and for me it was very, very important to have multiple perspectives, because I remember I told my friend about it, and she said, "I don't understand why you're having a white woman on," and I said, well, this is society. It doesn't affect just us. It affects a whole other race, because that whole other race is doing it to us. So the only way that we can come together with people from that other race who really care about us and wants to help us make change is if we have a partnership and if we're working together. So having a whole other perspective on was really important for me, because I felt like the viewers who were white would be able to better identify with her. So even though they will take into account what we're saying, and they'll hopefully change some of their ways if they have any negative ways in general, it's even more important because you're looking at someone who looks like you, and whether we like to say it out loud or not, that makes a huge difference, being able to identify with someone. So doing that was really, really important. And within that, I was able to share some of my stories and get their advice on it in terms of how they would deal with it. So we did a couple of role play scenarios, which were true stories. We had some of my stories and then some stories that other people had given into the show as well. And I told that story, and I asked Adrienne from Literacy Peak, so how would I actually deal with that? Because in the situation, I didn't know what to say, and none of us knew what to say. So she said, you know what, next time, ask a question back. So they've asked you a question. They asked her in that situation, when did you start hanging out with those people? And if I were to experience that again, I would break down the question and I would ask her, what do you mean by those people? So not only are you kind of signaling out those 2 words, those people, but you're asking her to think about what she's just said. And if she doesn't know what she's just said, it really kind of gets them to think, and it kind of gets them to think about, okay, what actually do I mean by those people? That was a strange choice of wording. Why did I say that? So kind of taking a question like that and then returning it with not an answer, but an actual question that really starts to get their brains flowing about what do they mean? Where did that come from? And I think that changes ignorance a little bit. It changes ignorance a huge amount, because with ignorance, you say something that you don't understand the meaning to. So when you're then presented with a question contradicting it, then you are taking in that understanding and you have an opportunity to really reflect on what you just said and figure it out for yourself.
How did because you just mentioned the episode that you did on your radio show, speaking about, during the Black Lives Matter movement. So how did that kind of affect you? How did that resonate with you?
I think that shook the world, really. It was during May, which was a couple months into COVID lockdown, which lasted much longer than we all expected. I think there was a lot more emphasis in general on social media. So not even in relation to Black Lives Matter, but before that, there was just a lot more emphasis on social media. And there was a lot of pivoting of direction and processes. So with my show, we had to figure out, okay, how are we going to keep this going? Because we can't get into the station, but it's something that we really care about. So how are we going to make sure that it's lasting? So we had to pivot the show to be more focused on social media, which is something that was interesting for me because I like social media, but I don't like to be on it all the time. So having to do that was definitely different. But in general, there was such a focus on social media because of COVID and because everyone was locked inside. Having George Floyd's murder, which is what it was, come on show in a time like that, I think it shook the entire world. And it was eye-opening because it's not new. Like things like that have happened before, and they continue to happen. So it's nothing new, and it's been happening for centuries. It's been happening decades and centuries. So the only difference is that now we have phones. Now we can video things. We have cameras. We have evidence. That's literally the only difference. So I think seeing it and watching it, even like I don't like watching things like that in general, whether it be a movie or whether it be real life. So I think the whole world watching that at the same time, combined with a global pandemic where people are dying and you're losing loved ones, and you know your heart is already hurting. So in general, to see that, in addition to the fact that there's a global pandemic and there's a virus in the world, but then also a virus in our society, is, I think it resonated with everyone. And for me personally, obviously I know what happens and I'm familiar with those types of situations, but seeing it happen and the lack of care and the complete disrespect for human life was mind-boggling. I couldn't believe it. So I think that was not, I don't want to say it needed to happen, but I think it was necessary to open the eyes of the whole world to say, listen, this happens, it's been happening. When are we going to change it? When are we going to do something about it? Because it's enough.
Yeah, I agree. I think in a weird way, it came at a good time, even though that's not the best. It's not the way I want to phrase it, but I think the COVID-19 forced everybody
to pay attention.
To stop.
It came at a time where you had no choice but to pay attention.
Right. And also I think that combined with, because of the virus, I do feel that as people, we started to value each other a lot higher, and started to actually take note of things that we weren't paying attention to, having the uncomfortable conversations, obviously seeing these videos, doing the hard stuff. I feel like it gave us a lot of time to do that. And then during that time, a lot of businesses, a lot of companies kind of reacted by putting out messages like Black Lives Matter, posting the Black Square. A lot were kind of fleeting for the moment. A lot were very reactionary. And then some, obviously, it's been a while since that's happened. So some of the companies that have supported that have continued to support that. But what would be your opinion on how businesses kind of reacted to that? Because obviously there's a distinction between business and social issues, but I think for this there was kind of there was an anomaly where businesses were getting involved in this as a social issue, because it does affect business to a large degree. So I wanted to get your opinion on how businesses kind of reacted to that.
I think something that concerned me when this all happened and in the height of it all, and continues to concern me, is the fact that it's a trend. And during everything, and this is what we talked about on the show as well, the purpose of having that show specifically was about educating and talking about, okay, how are we going to keep this going? Because this, again, is not new. I've said this 100 times, it's not too new. But how are we going to keep this going? How are we going to keep attention to it? How can we make a lasting effect so that this man's life and hundreds of thousands of other victims' lives weren't taken for granted? So having that show was really important, because we talked about the education of it and what you can do to further learn about it and to further open up your perspective. So it was really, it opened up a lot of conversations and beyond society, going into the corporate world as well. I'm sure it definitely opened up some conversations. But I think for companies, as I said, it's something that shook the world. And we have to realize that a lot of these companies have been around for decades, and they're very, very good at navigating.
Some of them have profited from the
Yeah,
problem, the
yeah, yeah.
original problem from slavery.
100%. I mean, when you look at America, there's a movie on Netflix called The 13th. Then when you look at America, the way that America has been set up is like evil genius is the only way that you can call it, because they've gone from slavery to Jim Crow, which is basically making it legal, segregation, all those things. So that's the first thing that they did, was that they had it in writing. When you have things in writing, it makes it a lot easier for you to get away with certain issues, which is why we need to further combat this, not with violence, but with writing and with education, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to kind of turn the page in a sense. But when you look at America, the way that they've done it is extremely strategic, and they've gone with the times in that, okay, we realize slavery is wrong, we need to stop doing that. Okay, how are we going to still profit from this? Jim Crow. Okay, cool. So segregation, Black people are not allowed to come into white arenas, and we're allowed to say that because it's illegal. And then, okay, that's not all right anymore. How are we going to combat this further? Let's criminalize so many acts that have nothing to do with a person. So let's criminalize weed. Let's make that illegal. Okay, great. So now so many Black people are in jail for petty crimes that are not even crimes. Like, marijuana grows from nature. It's completely natural. So it's things like that where they've really made a point to constantly put up barriers that we constantly keep breaking, and then there's a new barrier because they've pivoted. So I highly recommend everyone watch that movie, because it really goes into the timeline of things and the ways in which huge corporate companies have profited off of Black people and have continuously held us down, but we just keep on rising. So I think go ahead.
Sorry. Just to add to that, I think even on a bigger scale, like outside of America, I think what that documentary shows you is more how systemic racism works. And then you can kind of apply that knowledge to the UK when you see, how they did the grading system for the GCSEs, stuff like how, people reacted to the recent Sainsbury's advert.
Yeah.
All these things that are kind of embedded in our system, which kind of put people in almost like a cycle of, poverty, and the cycle of not having a better life or having a different experience to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that you brought up the UK as well, because obviously America is highly on show, but racism is all over the world. So even with the recent Sainsbury's advert, a lot of people were posting and saying, look, this is proof that UK is also racist. So it's not just America. And I know in general, we like to single out America, but it isn't just America. It goes beyond that. And for corporate companies, the reason why I was saying that they've gotten so good at navigating issues and pivoting to meet their own demands is the same thing that they've done with this situation. A lot of companies, they came out with the black tiles, they came out with their own corporate regulations and corporate cultures surrounding Black people and minorities in general, but it didn't last for every single company. I remember looking at I think it was Ralph Lauren. I looked at Ralph Lauren, and they had posted about the company culture, and they had posted the black tile and all these things, but where are the continuous posts? Where is the evidence that you've continued to make change, that you continue to care? Where is it? It's not there anymore, because even calling it BLM makes me very upset, because it's not a movement. I think personally, a movement is a situation or a place where you have a group of people who are going through something terrible, and they come out of it for the better, and they get what they need and what they deserve out of that change. So a movement is when you're in one place and you move somewhere else, you move on to bigger and better things. Calling this Black Lives Matter movement isn't right to me, because we haven't gotten what we deserve. This has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, and we haven't moved. We are still constantly battling systematic racism, police brutality, inequality. There's so many things that we still have to face, although we still keep on rising, because that's what we do as a people. We are faced with so many stresses, and we make sure that we come out of it on the other hand. But as a whole race, it's not a movement, because we haven't gotten what we deserve, and we haven't gotten the benefit of all our hard work yet. So I think in general, the trend, it was the trend, and you can even see now that it's definitely died down quite a bit. So it's not Black Lives Matter all over your newsfeed anymore. It's back to regular Instagram posting. So for me and the things that I'm involved in, especially with the radio show, it's really important that we keep that in people's mind, and we keep reminding people, because this isn't over, and it hasn't been over for a very, very long time.
How do you think, just to kind of wrap it up, because I'm being conscious of time, but how do you think going forward companies can support such, movements? I know you don't like that word, but basically, how do you think companies can improve diversity and combat inequality in a genuine way?
I think first you have to mean it. That's the genuine part of it. You have to mean it. You have to write down things that you're actually going to follow through on, and consistency is key here. Don't just do it for the trend. Don't just do it because you have hundreds of customers that are on your tail, for lack of a better phrase, but don't just do it because there's hundreds of thousands of people riled up and you think it's going to pass. You just have to get through the publicity stunt of it, right? So it's consistency, and it's going into those communities, and depending on what your company is, this is where CSR is very important as well. CSR is corporate social responsibility, and often it's very much focused on the environment, which is incredible, because that's the only way we're going to be able to survive here as a whole community and society. But CSR is generally very much focused on the environment. Within that, I think CSR policies within companies should also be inclusive of minorities, and how are we going to help minorities and Black people in particular? How are we going to put in quotas and make it more equitable? So not necessarily equality, but making it more equitable, and making sure that people who are from minorities get the opportunities to become leaders and to develop their careers into leading positions. So doing training programs, and again, going into their society, depending on what the company is. If it's something like insurance, which is really popular at home, going into the society and really talking to people, talking to the communities. What do they need? Where are they lacking? And what support can a huge multinational company, or even a small business, what support can they actually give? So I think for bigger companies, changing their CSR is very important. And as I said, having things written down, regulations, laws, that's how we've gotten to where we are today, because a lot of it is legal. Even when you look in the the police force, the reason why police get away with a lot of things is because once they get into the force, it's extremely difficult to fire a police officer. If a police officer is let go for misconduct, then they can come back with an arbitrator and they can kind of plead the case. And a lot of the times there's issues that have happened within the system where there's loss of evidence or things like that. So that's why I say writing things down, having legislation, having rules and regulations is very, very important. I think that's probably the only way that we're going to be able to truly combat this and to make a difference. So especially for big companies that probably have quite a bit of influence with the government, making sure that the companies are really focused on CSR and focused on that community benefit and going in and having a relationship with the community is hugely important.
Definitely. No, thank you really much for being a guest and also just educating not only the listeners but also me. I feel like I've learned a lot from this conversation, and I feel like a lot of other people listening will be able to apply a lot of your experiences and a lot of the stories that you've spoken about to their businesses and to their life going forward.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And
really,
the last thing that I'll say is education is hugely important. Not only education within a company, through, as I said, trainings and kind of ethics and things like that, but education in schooling is important. The schools that I went to didn't put any highlight on Black history, and I think that's where I missed out on a lot of lessons, and especially my counterparts, they missed out on a lot of lessons. So changing education, the way that we educate people is hugely important, because we have to realize that we've been educated at the hands of our oppressors. So of course we're learning what they want us to learn and we're not learning what they don't want us to learn. So if companies can push education in schooling and in their offices, then even better.
definitely. Yeah, so how can people reach out to you? How can people follow up with you and see what you're doing and follow your businesses and support you?
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone who is interested in the radio station where we highlight independent talent, whether it be artists, designers, entrepreneurs, really try and make sure that there's a spotlight on fresh talent and they get their opportunity to showcase all their skills and really have a platform for people to be able to view them. Anyone who is interested in that, whether it be that they are talent or no talent or just want to watch the show, you can tune in on Instagram. We post there quite often. It's at Relax&Bake FM. If you're looking to email, if you have any questions, you can email us at relaxandbakefm@gmail.com. And for myself personally, if anyone wants to have a conversation, talk about some of the other endeavors that I am involved in, I'm happy for you to email me at Kyla, KYLA, Lowe, LOWE, @gmail.com.
Thank you so much, Kyla. Have a nice afternoon. And yeah, we'll be in touch with you, but really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited to see how your future podcasts come out. And I hope everyone stays tuned in because I know there's definitely some good things coming out. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
100 Stories was inspired by the hundreds of brave people of colour who have felt the Black Lives Matter movement has given them an opportunity to share their stories and experiences. This series coincides with the increasing demand and interest from allies who want to better understand the forms of prejudice and microaggressions that take place every day. We want our 100 Stories to be an accessible platform for Black people in and around our community to share their stories, either anonymously or openly. We do this in a bid to keep the conversation alive and continue to help people understand what it's like when you don't have a seat at the table. If you're interested in sharing one of your stories, please get in touch via media@sync.co.uk. Thanks for listening.